Some women believe they've got killer credentials. An unhappy wife sets a besotted teen a lethal task.
If she truly loved him, she would never ask him to do such a horrible thing.
God forgive me.
Lord.
A showgirl's marriage is a flop, but with murder, she's a smash.
She saw it as something that she did for survival.
And a property developer
Nice place.
has big plans for her new husband.
Glad you could come.
That was like the cherry on the sundae. That's what brought her over the edge.
There are people that like to be in the back of the room and not observed, and that wasn't Pam.
She really wanted to be the center of attention.
Florida college student Pam Wohas knows what she likes, and in 1987, 22-year-old Greg Smart has all the right moves.
So she was kind of that 80s chick obsessed with the heavy metal music of the day.
Greg had long, curly hair, looked like he could have been in a metal band, and Pam really liked that.
So what kind of bands do you listen to?
Van Halen, Motley Crue.
They're my favorite.
With confidence, looks, and ambition.
How come I've never seen you around before?
I'm studying broadcast journalism in Florida.
19-year-old Pam is an alluring catch for Greg.
She was smart, she was pretty, she was outgoing from all reports. She had things going for her.
Yeah, I'm gonna be the next Barbara Walters.
Is she a headbanger?
This one is.
Pam did very well in college.
Oh my God, I love this song. Yes.
She wanted to be a broadcast anchor, and she was on her way for that to happen.
After college, the headbanging couple marry, move to New Hampshire, and into the next phase of their life.
Pam got a job as a media representative with the school district, and Greg started working in insurance. They bought a condo. Life was going well.
So what do you think?
But only one of them wants to grow up.
I liked the Wild Boy better.
The Wild Boy couldn't make much money selling insurance.
Greg was no longer the happy-go-lucky partying college kid, and he was conforming. He had cut his hair, was starting to wear suits to work.
When I'm on TV, we'll have plenty of money.
Yeah, sure.
I don't know that she wanted the house, the dog, suburbia. She wanted attention.
While she's not yet a TV star, Pam finds some glory working at a high school.
Look who it is.
Pam had a job as the director of media services, which gave her access to the high school students.
I'm in love.
They loved her.
Hi, Billy.
Someone told me you met Van Halen.
I did.
She was great at her job.
Seriously? Did you meet them?
I did. And it was really exciting. Actually, he was wearing an ugly bracelet, a little bit like that one. See you, boys.
Bye, Pam.
It's clear to me Pam was getting a lot more reinforcement from the teenagers she was hanging around than she was her husband.
It's not just attention at school she loves. Pam starts inviting students home when her husband's away.
It's just sex.
She's like the wild party aunt, you know, but just hotter.
Cecilia, will you take Halen for his walk now, please? Of course.
But hanging out is never going to be enough.
I'll be back.
Pam sets her sights on seducing 15-year-old Billy Flynn.
You look at him, and he's a younger version of Greg. He's got the long hair, he's into the heavy metal music. And this must just blow his mind.
Come on, your turn.
Here is this housewife, gorgeous, young. He's all in.
She loved being the center of attention. In fact, she had to be the center of attention wherever she went.
Now that Pam's getting all the attention she needs at school, husband Greg is redundant.
I don't know what you want from me.
Greg's biggest mistake was cutting his hair, getting a job, working hard, being successful.
I want a divorce.
The speed of life for her isn't fast anymore. She's status quo. She's one more wife of a husband in a neighborhood where everybody does the same thing, and this wasn't enough for her. She needed more.
Yeah, well, I'm not moving out.
Greg Smart became
I paid for all this.
an obstacle in her life.
Well, it's half mine.
Pam wants out,
Yeah? We'll see.
but she's not ready to give up on the good life.
I can't believe you. I'm taking the dog.
Like hell you are.
She's got a better idea. In New Hampshire, Pam Smart has a plan to be free of her husband and live the good life.
You guys have one shot. Do not mess this up.
Billy Flynn, Vance J.R. Lattamy, Pete Randall, and Raymond Fowler are at murder school.
I need you to wait for Greg to get home.
Head of the class is her 15-year-old lover, Billy.
Billy was pushed further into believing if I didn't do this, I would lose Pam.
Take whatever you want. I need this to look like a botched burglary.
Now I get why you're wearing all your rings.
Yeah, you're not getting your hands on these.
They were 15. She was 8 years older, and her experience in life taught her how to manipulate them.
Where's the gun?
The boys got the gun from JR's father. JR stole it, or borrowed it, so to speak, for the night.
Good. Okay, I gotta go. Don't mess this up.
These kids were pawns in her little game of death.
On the evening of May 1st, 1990, Pam's ambush is in play. While two teens hide in a getaway car, Pete Randall and Billy Flynn wait for the victim.
So they come out of the shadows and they basically jump Greg.
Pleading with the teenagers, Greg is unaware who's behind the attack.
They start saying, "Give me your jewelry."
Give me your wallet and your wedding ring.
Not my ring. My wife will kill me.
He said, I can't. My wife would kill me.
Faced with the reality of taking a man's life, the teens falter. Billy tries to steel himself for love.
Pam said to Billy, if you love me, you would do this for me. Unfortunately, Billy wasn't mature enough or experienced enough to know that if she truly loved him, she would never ask him to do such a horrible thing.
No, please don't. Please.
In the prime of his life,
Please, no, please.
24-year-old Greg Smart is executed.
Please.
God forgive me.
On the order of his wife.
Pam's motive was to cancel out the life she didn't want and move on into the life she wanted. Instead of divorcing the guy, she wanted to wipe that slate clean.
According to Pam, getting away with murder is easy.
I think Pam thought by the fact that she didn't get her hands dirty, there's no way she could be convicted of this crime.
Help me! Anybody! Please! My husband!
But Pam Smart wasn't very smart.
For an aspiring TV anchor, Pam's performance for the police lacks credibility.
Okay, so I came through the front door, and then the first thing I saw was the speakers off their stand, which is weird, and it seems like a botched burglary. You know?
All right.
One of the first things Pam said to them was not that her husband was dead on the floor, but stuff was gone.
Oh, well, and then I saw Greg.
That aroused suspicion.
But by using her teenage killers, Pam can prove that she was nowhere near the apartment that night. She soon discovers using teenage killers also has a downside.
When you're dealing with teenagers and murder, it's comical to think that people are going to be quiet.
Vance's father overhears the boys discussing his gun, the murder weapon.
To Vance Latamy's father's credit, he went and got the gun, took it to the local police station, said, I think my gun was used in this crime, and they did a ballistic test, and it was.
The boys are arrested, but they don't give up Pam. But not all of her students are under her spell.
I know who killed Greg Smart. Pam did.
Cecilia Pierce knows every detail of the murder plot and agrees to entrap Pam.
Seeing what's happened, wouldn't you rather have just divorced Greg?
I don't know.
She actually threatened her,
But you better not say anything.
saying, who do you think the police are gonna believe? A respected professional like me or a bunch of 15-year-olds?
Aren't you worried about getting caught?
No. Who are they going to believe? Me or some teenager in the slammer?
The confession is all the police need.
I gotta go.
Pam was book smart, but when it came to people smarts, she sat at the back of the class.
Pam is so confident, she has no idea she's even a suspect.
They end up in her office, and law enforcement comes in, and Pam says,
What's up?
you have something? And they say, yeah, we have some good news and some bad news.
The good news is we've solved your husband's murder.
The bad news is you're under arrest. You're coming with us.
In 1991, Raymond Fowler is convicted of murder conspiracy, and Vance J.R. Latamy as accomplice to second-degree murder. Both are sentenced to 30 years in prison, released on parole in 2005. Pete planned.
In the end, Pam Smart got her wish because she is all over broadcast news.
Pam was a child, a teenager who married an adult. It's a good thing she's in prison. We're fascinated with attractive or wealthy people that commit murder.
Bored.
You have everything. You have good looks. You have money. And that's when the danger begins.
In 1918, Chicago is the place to be. And Belva Gartner is used to being center stage.
Belva put the roar in Roaring 20s. She became a cabaret singer, had a bigger-than-life personality.
She enjoyed the attention that she received both on stage and off stage.
You haven't lost it.
But a 34-year-old showgirl can't tread the boards forever. So Belva turns those talents to securing her future.
I do miss it.
You're one of the wealthiest women in the city.
Oh, I'm bored. Bored.
Belva accomplished the impossible. She got a wealthy, respected older man to marry her.
Darling, our guests are waiting.
Not just any wealthy man. 54-year-old William Gartner is the catch of Chicago's high society.
William had everything necessary to attract a high society partner, but he wasn't interested in that. He liked the flappers.
It'll be fun. Always friends just love me.
He was a very eligible bachelor, and it was really quite scandalous. He marries a cabaret dancer, which would very much be like a person
herself scorned.
So, when does the show begin?
There's a show? Why else are we here?
And Belva doesn't stay where she's not the star.
Get me out of here.
Married life was a little too boring for Belva. She missed the cabarets, she missed the attention.
After dark, Belva slips away to the world she knows best.
by sneaking out. She felt that she was part of this cabaret scene where she fit in and she was admired, as opposed to this really stuffy Chicago society scene where she wasn't admired and she was an outsider.
Soon she's out every night until the early hours, while William leads the office life of 9 to 5.
Belva! You can't keep doing this! You've been drinking again, haven't you?
Get up and have some fun with me for a change.
Disrupted sleep is soon the least of William's marriage problems.
Do you like it? Do you like me?
We do see her start taking an interest in men younger than herself, and certainly decades younger than her older husband.
She wanted a young stud in her bed.
William may be smitten, but he's not stupid.
He had private detectives following her.
William, I wasn't expecting you to join us.
You'll be hearing from my lawyers.
She didn't see marriage as something that she did for love. She saw it as something that she did for survival.
A divorce might mean losing her lifeline, but at least the scandal puts her back in the spotlight.
Make sure you get my good side.
With the settlement, Belva split.
Speakeasies. They wanted to drink gin, they wanted to dance, and they wanted to have a good time. He was married, he had a child, but they were stepping out together in secret.
Yeah, Belva, yeah.
With a young stud in her bed, Belva has exactly what she craves: complete adoration.
Walter was 10 years younger than Belva. Perhaps Belva chose him because she knew she could control him.
In her quest for control, she is threatening.
Oftentimes, threats are the beginning of the end.
Chicago in early 1924. Former showgirl Belva Gartner and her boy toy, Walter Law, tear up the town.
I need to go home.
Rubbish. The night is young.
As the relationship progressed between Belva and Walter, it stopped being so fun. He was no longer interested in being with Belva.
But Walter soon discovers that decision is not his to make.
You're not going anywhere. Don't make me angry, love.
She behaved more and more badly, not only being mildly abusive, but when Walter tried to leave Belva, she threatened him with a knife. Things were getting out of control.
I really should get home. To Frida.
What? Don't be ridiculous.
Walter believes he's living on borrowed time.
Walter was so convinced his life was in danger from Belva, he took out more life insurance. That's a bad sign.
Belva, I can't. I'm done, okay?
On March 12th, 1924, Walter says goodbye.
He's brought her back to her apartment. His plan was to just walk away at that point.
But he succumbs to Belva's control one final time.
Okay, but wait. I have something for you.
She went inside, collected her gun, and shot him directly in the face.
Belva flees back to her apartment, but leaves a trail of evidence, including her own car with a dead body behind the wheel. In no time, the police are at her door.
Her blood-soaked clothes were on the floor, and her watch had been shattered at the exact time that the murder occurred, 1:15 a.m.
Are these your clothes?
Well, yes. Walter was bleeding. I tried to pull him out of the driver's seat.
Belva has a ridiculous defense. From the get-go, she was very irritated by their suggestion that she was part of it. Really irritated, almost as if they should just go clean up this mess for her and not bother her.
And, how did the gun go off?
Oh, I can't remember. I tell you, mixing gin and guns can get you in a dickens of a mess.
And this is a man who is dead, and she's describing it as a dickens of a mess.
The evidence against Belva is overwhelming. But in the Roaring 20s, Chicago is known for glamorous women getting away with murder.
Chicago was fascinated with female killers. It wasn't unusual for these women to walk out of court, especially the pretty ones.
In 1924, Belva Gartner's murder trial is the best show in town.
Belva was many things, but above all else, she was an entertainer.
This time, the audience she woos is the all-male jury. It's a simple performance. She tells them she can't remember what happened.
She knew exactly how to manipulate the jury.
Belva, how does it feel to be free?
Belva, over here. Come on, give us a good one.
I'm just so happy.
Not only is she acquitted, she walks straight back into a life of luxury with her ex-husband, William.
And she's going to essentially get the vacation she deserves after this long ordeal.
Belva Gartner has an itch for fame, and 15 minutes won't scratch it.
This woman was a master manipulator, and Manipulating people and trying to have control was how she made it through life.
She razzles and dazzles her way out of prison and into the realm of eternal stardom.
Belva inspired the character Velma Kelly in the musical Chicago. And it's really sad in a way that this musical and this legend is celebrated.
Belva got away with every bad behavior she ever exhibited, and in the end, she got away with murder. Some women marry for money.
Nice place.
And that's enough. But for other women,
Why won't you look at that?
it's never enough.
Kansas City, Kansas, 1998. 46-year-old Ed Patton is a high flyer in the real estate world.
Man, do I need this? Was that the most boring conference or what?
Ed came from a very prominent family. He really liked the identity that he had established as being kind of this playboy.
At 48, Tyler Block is a newcomer to the industry. Keen to make her mark. With 3 failed marriages behind her, romance is not in Tyler's business plan.
I don't want to be here. I've got too much work to do.
She used her motivation, she used her good looks, she used her charisma.
Ed can open doors.
Really? I thought he was just a party boy.
No, he's more than that. You know, he's a trust funder.
He's also the sole heir to his family's fortune. Suddenly, Ed has Tyler's full attention.
Glad you could come. Tyler.
Nice place.
Well, let me give you the tour.
Ed was a self-described trust funder. Although she had done fairly well for herself, she wanted more, and he could provide it.
Both, had been on this lifelong search for love.
Oh, that is beautiful.
So, Sarah tells me you've got a few ideas.
Yeah, I've got some really big plans.
Well, love to hear them.
Right, well, maybe we could have a lunch someday.
Sure. And when they had met each other, that was it. They both felt as if, we had finally found our soulmates.
A whirlwind romance leads to marriage. They join forces in business, buying and flipping homes.
In the early part of the marriage, Tyler seemed pretty happy.
But the honeymoon doesn't last.
They were married for less than a year when things really started to go downhill.
You gotta look at this one.
We're not having this conversation.
Why won't you look at that?
We can't afford another property right now.
Tyler was claiming that Ed had not been truthful when it came to how much money he had.
What about your trust fund?
Mom's in charge of that.
Turns out, Ed's mother holds the purse strings to his trust fund.
You are so pathetic! Mom's in charge of that! I thought you were loaded.
It's not that loaded.
She wanted Ed to provide her with a luxury lifestyle and blamed him for not giving her what she wanted. Tyler suffered from terminal entitlement syndrome. She wanted him, but not as much as she wanted his wallet.
This was not your average marital spat. This was vicious, vicious fighting.
The fight is so vicious, Ed records it.
Record me. I don't care.
And adds it to a growing file he's keeping on Tyler.
Out of all my husbands, you are the most pathetic. You are a big loser, a mommy's boy.
Tyler knew Ed was recording one of her rants, And she continued ranting. In fact, it got worse.
Can we please just work this out?
Can we please just work this out?
Once she got going, she was kind of out of control.
I really wanted to work, but not bad.
By January 2001, the marriage is hanging by a thread.
She just goes crazy. Hon, I was...
Shut it. Get out. Now.
Tyler basically said that he should ask his mother for more money.
Did you call your mother?
I can't.
Fine.
It's the final straw.
I'm leaving.
Hon, please.
Tyler did not want to have anything else to do with Ed.
Tyler moved in to one of their rental properties.
Hi, it's Tyler from the Realtors.
He told her, take whatever you want. And oh, did she.
I need a removal list. ASAP.
She got a moving company and took all of the furniture except for the master bedroom furniture and furniture from Ed's office.
Things change for people when they enter middle age. Life takes on a different perspective. Kind of a do or die. I don't have a lot of time left to get what I want.
Ed did not have a chance. He never saw this coming.
Hoping that Ed was doing well, and there were 9 of these messages left.
But Ed never hears her messages because 2 days earlier, on January 14th, 2001, Tyler visits him for the last time.
Tyler came over to the house where Ed was sleeping alone, quietly crept through the door, 2x4 in hand. And she proceeded to administer a repeated and very, very vengeful beating.
He was hit 6 to 12 times in the head area.
This was a murder that was done with a lot of anger, a lot of malice.
She may have been angry with him, but at that moment, the murder, she was dispatching him.
Tyler stages the crime scene as a robbery gone wrong. And 2 days later, returns as the devoted and concerned wife.
Hello. I think there's an intruder in my house. And I think my husband's in there too.
Tyler went by the marital house and walked inside and said that she heard an intruder of some sort. So she left the residence, called the police, and had them check the residence.
Ma'am, did you call about an intruder? Yes. Okay, let's go check it out.
Police find the house in disarray.
That was one of the things that really sent up a red flag because it did, in fact, look very staged.
Nothing valuable was taken. There were items that were on the floor that would have broken if they'd been knocked off of the counters.
They find no forced entry and no signs of an intruder.
But they did find
the body of Ed Patton in the master bedroom. So he had been bludgeoned beyond recognition.
But the state of the body shows the murder didn't happen tonight, and the killer has been careless.
Police did find the murder weapon, a 2-foot-long piece of 2x4 lumber outside the residence.
Tyler plays the grieving widow.
Oh, beautiful Ed. Oh!
Very distraught. She was very theatrical. She knew how to put on a good show.
She's eager to help police with the investigation.
Detectives?
It's like she had an ego about herself. There's no way they'll never, ever name me as a suspect. Look at me, I'm this little blonde bombshell. I don't fit the profile of a murderer.
You told us that you and Ed had a loving relationship.
He was the love of my life.
But the loving messages Tyler leaves on Ed's voicemail aren't the only recordings the police find in the home.
You are so pathetic. Mom's in charge of that. Record me. I don't care.
A microcassette tape was found in Ed's house containing an argument that Ed had recorded about 2 weeks earlier. Things weren't as rosy as Tyler had portrayed them.
Doesn't sound very loving.
It wasn't serious.
That totally knocked her out of the box.
And investigators discover damning forensic evidence.
Even if the police had not found the Tyler tapes, Ed's DNA, of course, was on one end of the murder weapon.
Seen these?
Your DNA was found here.
Well, that doesn't prove anything.
And Tyler's skin DNA was on the other.
I probably touched it. I mean, this is ridiculous.
Stand up, put your hands behind your back.
Okay, but this is not right.
That was really the piece of evidence, that DNA evidence, that sealed her fate.
In 2002, Tyler Block Patton is convicted of first-degree murder. She is sentenced to life with no possibility of parole for 25 years. These deadly women took control, even when it came to...
At 5:17 a.m., the phone rang inside a brick house on the south side of Chicago, the kind of ringing that doesn't ask for permission, the kind that slices through sleep like a blade. Outside, the city was still half frozen in early spring, streetlights buzzing, trash drifting along the curb, a newspaper already soaked from last night's rain. Inside, a woman lifted the receiver and heard a voice that would never leave her again. A voice that said a name. A voice that said found. A voice that stopped short before saying alive. Chicago, 1993. The year the Bulls were kings. The year the city felt loud and unstoppable. The year no one noticed when one person quietly disappeared. She was 26 years old. A routine life, by all accounts. Same bus stop every morning. Same corner coffee shop. Same nod to the same strangers whose names she never learned. She lived 3 blocks from where she grew up, in an apartment that smelled faintly of dust and detergent, its windows facing an alley where kids played basketball with a dented hoop nailed to a telephone pole. No enemies. No record. No drama that made headlines. Which is why, when she didn't come home one night, no one thought to panic. Not yet. The last confirmed sighting came from a convenience store camera. Grainy. Flickering. Timestamp burned into the corner like a scar. She steps inside at 9:42 p.m., buys cigarettes she doesn't usually smoke, glances once over her shoulder as if someone is standing too close, and then she's gone again, swallowed by the darkness beyond the door. The camera doesn't follow. It never does. By morning, her bed was still made. Her purse sat on the kitchen table. Her shoes were lined neatly by the door, as if she had stepped out for a minute and planned to come right back. No sign of a struggle. No broken glass. No neighbors reporting screams. Just absence. Thick. Heavy. Unexplained. Police called it a missing person. Routine. Standard procedure. Another file added to a metal cabinet already bending under the weight of too many names. Officers knocked on doors. Asked questions. Took notes. Everyone said the same thing. She was quiet. She was polite. She kept to herself. No one noticed anything strange. No one saw anything worth remembering. Chicago kept moving. 3 days later, they found her car. Parked legally. Engine cold. No damage. No blood. No fingerprints that didn't belong. Just a single receipt on the passenger seat from a gas station 12 miles away, time-stamped an hour after she was last seen on camera. An impossible detail. A contradiction that didn't fit the map. She didn't drive. She never did. Friends confirmed it. Family swore to it. She was afraid of traffic, afraid of highways, afraid of losing control. Yet here was her car, miles from home, telling a story no one could explain. Detectives felt it then. That subtle shift. The moment a missing person case tilts into something darker. They retraced her steps, walked her route, measured distances, interviewed co-workers who remembered nothing unusual, just a normal shift, a normal goodbye, a normal night that wasn't normal at all. Rumors crept in faster than facts. A stranger, a stalker, a deal gone wrong, a secret life no one knew about. The neighborhood started locking doors earlier. Mothers called their daughters before bed. Headlines used words like mysterious and unexplained, careful not to say what everyone was thinking. Cold case wasn't a word yet. Not officially, but the temperature was dropping. Weeks passed, then months. Then the seasons changed, and with them, the urgency. Leaves dried up. Tips turned vague. A man called in claiming he saw her get into a blue sedan. Another swore he heard screaming near the river. None of it held. None of it stuck. The file grew thicker, heavier, harder to justify reopening every morning. The city forgot. Her family didn't. Every birthday passed like a wound reopening. Every holiday left an empty chair. Her mother kept the porch light on long after the neighbors turned theirs off, as if light alone could guide her back home. Detectives stopped calling. The case was labeled inactive. The word felt like an insult. Somewhere, in a filing room that smelled of paper and dust, her name slid into a row marked unresolved. A cold case before anyone dared to call it that. Years later, the street looked the same, but everything felt different. The same brick houses, the same cracked sidewalks, the same alley behind her old apartment, where the basketball hoop had finally fallen, rusted and forgotten. People moved in. People moved out. Children grew up without ever knowing the story buried beneath their feet. Inside police headquarters, technology moved forward while her case stayed frozen. DNA databases expanded. Fingerprint systems modernized. Files once typed on carbon paper were scanned, digitized, reduced to data points waiting to be rediscovered. Hers sat quietly among them, a ghost in the system. Every few years, a new detective glanced at the file. Fresh eyes, fresh coffee, the same dead ends. They would read the reports, trace the timeline, circle the same contradictions. The gas station receipt, the car, the distance, always the distance. 12 miles might as well have been 12 states. One detective noted something others hadn't emphasized. The location where the car was found. A residential block. Quiet. Ordinary. The kind of place no one looks twice at. It wasn't random. It felt placed. He drove the route himself one night, long after his shift ended, watching the city lights blur past his windshield. When he parked where the car had been found all those years ago, he noticed something chilling in its simplicity. From that spot, you could see the entrance to the neighborhood. You could watch who came and who went. You could wait. Back then, no one had thought to canvass that block thoroughly. Too much time had passed by the time the significance emerged. Doors had closed. Memories faded. People moved on. Or so everyone assumed. In 2011, a box surfaced during an archive cleanup. Inside, handwritten notes from a retired officer. Marginal observations. Small things deemed irrelevant at the time. One line stood out, underlined twice. Neighbor reported unfamiliar male lingering nearby weeks before disappearance. No name. No follow-up. Just that. The detective tracked down the address. Same block. Same quiet stretch of pavement. A man still lived there. Older now. Grayer. Still invisible. He had lived within walking distance of her apartment in 1993. Lived there in silence. Lived there while posters went up. Lived there while police searched. Lived there while her mother waited by the window every night. Decades passed, and he never moved. The first interview was uneventful. Polite answers. Cooperative tone. Claimed he remembered nothing. Why would he? It was a long time ago. People disappear all the time in a city like Chicago. But something was off. Not what he said. How he said it. Too measured. Too calm. As if he had rehearsed for years without ever knowing the lines would finally be called. They didn't have enough. Not yet. Just a feeling. Just intuition sharpened by time and failure. The kind that keeps detectives awake at night. A search warrant followed. Then another. Technology did what time could not. Old fibers matched new samples. Soil patterns aligned. A trace once meaningless now spoke loudly in a language science had finally learned to translate. The cold case warmed. And with it came a realization that hit the department like a shockwave. The suspect had been there all along. Close enough to watch the search parties pass. Close enough to read the headlines. Close enough to blend in. The neighborhood that once felt safe went quiet again, this time under a different weight. People looked at each other differently. Counted the years. Did the math. Chicago, 1993, was no longer just a memory. It was a warning. By the time the warrant was signed, the city had already begun to whisper. Not loudly. Not publicly. Just enough to change the way doors closed at night. Just enough to make people double-check who was standing across the street. Just enough to revive a name most had learned to forget. A cold case reopening doesn't announce itself with sirens. It creeps back into the bloodstream of a community like a delayed reaction, slow, unsettling, impossible to ignore once it starts. The house sat exactly where it always had. 2 stories. Faded paint. Curtains drawn even in daylight. A place so ordinary it had survived decades without comment. Officers approached carefully, boots heavy on concrete that had not changed since the early 90s. When the door opened, the man looked surprised in a way that didn't quite reach his eyes. Older now. Slower. But the structure was the same. The same height witnesses had vaguely remembered. The same frame that could disappear into a crowd without leaving an impression. Inside, the air smelled stale, layered with years of silence. Boxes stacked neatly. Furniture arranged with intention. No chaos. No obvious signs of panic or guilt. This was not the home of someone unraveling. This was the home of someone who had been waiting. They searched methodically. Every drawer. Every crawl space. Every inch of a life built to look unremarkable. Then, in a basement corner, they found something that stopped the room cold. A box sealed with tape, so old it cracked when peeled back. Inside, items wrapped in newspaper dated 1993. A receipt. Not the gas station receipt, but one like it. Same chain. Same ink. Same quiet scream of coincidence that no longer felt coincidental at all. The man was taken in for questioning. In the interview room, the lights hummed softly. The kind of room designed to strip away time, where hours pass unnoticed and memories are forced to surface whether they want to or not. He sat with his hands folded, posture composed, eyes focused on a spot just beyond the detective's shoulder. Calm. Too calm. They started gently. Name. Address. Employment history. He answered everything without hesitation, as if he had lived these questions before. Then they shifted. The night she disappeared. Where was he? Who was he with? Did he know her? No, he said. Never met her. The lie didn't land with a thud. It landed like a feather. Soft. Almost convincing. Almost. They slid a photo across the table. Not her. The convenience store still. Grainy. Blurred. The reflection in the glass behind her. A shape. A shadow. A figure standing just outside the frame. Visible only if you knew how to look. They said nothing. Let the image do the work. For the first time, his jaw tightened. Silence stretched. The clock ticked loudly, each second a reminder that time, which had once protected him, was no longer on his side. He shifted in his chair, adjusted his hands, looked down. Detectives didn't push yet. They waited. Pressure applied. 2 early breaks fragile things. And this wasn't fragile. This was compressed. Decades of control packed tight. When he spoke again, his voice changed. Not louder. Not softer. Just different. He said he might have seen her. Once. Around the neighborhood. People blend together after a while, he explained. Especially women. Especially at night. That was enough. Outside the room, the team compared notes. Fiber analysis from the basement matched samples preserved from her clothing. Soil from his yard aligned with traces found in her car. The gas station receipt wasn't a fluke. It was a breadcrumb, one of many that no one had known how to read at the time. But something was still missing. Her body had never been found. Without it, the case balanced on a razor's edge. Circumstantial evidence could tell a story, but stories don't always survive a courtroom. They needed more. Something undeniable. Something that could speak for her after all these years. They went back to the beginning. Back to the alley. Back to the route she walked every night. Back to the convenience store where everything last made sense. Technology enhanced the footage frame by frame. The reflection sharpened. The shadow gained definition. A face emerged. Not clear enough for certainty, but familiar enough to send a chill through the room. They compared it to an old driver's license photo. It matched. The suspect was confronted again. This time, the tone changed. No more open-ended questions. No more space to wander. Just facts. Just evidence. Just the slow collapse of a life built on being overlooked. You lived nearby, the detective said. You watched her. He didn't deny it. He said she talked to him once. Just once. He said she was polite. That she smiled. That she didn't seem afraid. The words came faster now, tumbling over each other, decades of restraint finally slipping. He said it wasn't supposed to happen the way it did. That was the moment the room shifted. The moment everyone knew they had crossed the line from suspicion into confession territory. Not a full admission. Not yet. But the mask was cracked. They pressed. Where did you take her? What happened after the gas station? Why the car? His breathing changed. Shallow. Uneven. He stared at the table as if it might open and swallow him whole. Then he said nothing. Lawyer. Silence. End of interview. But silence can be loud. News broke within hours. Chicago 1993 cold case reopened. Suspect in custody. Lived nearby for decades. The headlines exploded across screens and papers, reigniting a story many thought belonged to another era. Phones rang in newsrooms. Reporters dug through archives. Neighbors gathered on sidewalks, whispering names they hadn't spoken in years. Her family was notified last. The call came in the evening, when the light outside was fading, the same way it had the night she never came home. A voice on the other end explained carefully, cautiously, as if afraid the truth might shatter what little peace remained. A suspect. Evidence. Progress. No answers yet. Just movement. For the first time in nearly 20 years, the case was no longer frozen. It was alive again. Dangerous. Unpredictable. Close to resolution, but still haunted by one question that refused to go away. Where was she? The city held its breath. Because everyone knew that when a cold case starts to speak, it rarely does so gently. The search resumed the way it should have begun years earlier. Slow, deliberate, unforgiving. Not with hope, but with discipline. Cadaver dogs traced patterns through backyards that had grown over their secrets. Ground-penetrating radar swept across patches of soil that looked innocent enough to fool a passerby. Detectives returned to places they'd driven past 1,000 times without ever knowing they were driving circles around the truth. The suspect said nothing. His attorney spoke for him now, carefully, clinically, turning every sentence into a wall. But walls leave shadows, and shadows reveal shape. They mapped his life in 1993 minute by minute. Work schedules, bus routes, pay stubs, phone records preserved on microfilm that crackled when touched. He worked nights then, off at 9:30, the same time she walked home. The overlap tightened like a knot. Neighbors from the 90s were tracked down. Some had moved to the suburbs, some to other states, some to graves. Those still alive remembered fragments. A man who watched too closely. A man who stood on his porch longer than necessary. A man whose eyes followed women down the block without apology. At the time, it was just discomfort. Now it was context. One woman recalled a scream. Not loud, not long, just enough to make her pause by her window before convincing herself it was nothing. City noise, car alarms, life. She never called it in. She lived with that choice ever since. The gas station 12 miles away became a focal point. Employees were gone. Management had changed, but the layout remained. Cameras replaced. Lights brighter. Detectives stood where she must have stood, breathing the same stale air, imagining the weight of a stranger's presence beside her. Why stop there? Why that place? The answer came quietly, hiding inside the mundane. It was open late. It was on the way. It was where control could be tested. The receipt told a new story under new scrutiny. Time, pump number, amount. A partial print lifted with techniques that didn't exist in 1993. It matched him. Pressure mounted. The prosecutor wanted the body. The jury would want it too. Without it, the defense would carve doubt into every corner. Reasonable doubt. The phrase hovered like a threat. Then a tip came in. Anonymous. Short. Specific. It named a place along the river, a narrow strip of land hidden by trees and shielded from view by a bend in the road. The caller didn't explain how they knew. They didn't need to. They hung up. Search teams moved at dawn. Fog hugged the water, thick and uncooperative. Dogs picked up a scent and pulled hard toward the embankment. Shovels cut into soil layered with years of decay. Time fought back, compressing evidence, erasing edges. Then something surfaced that didn't belong to the earth. Fabric. Weathered. Faded. Recognizable. Forensic teams worked in silence, their movements precise, reverent. Bones emerged slowly, reluctantly, as if resisting the idea of being seen again. Dental records confirmed what no one wanted to say out loud. It was her. After all these years, she had been waiting less than 15 miles from home. The city exhaled and recoiled at the same time. The suspect was brought back in. This time, the evidence spoke first. Photos, reports, coordinates. The river didn't lie. Neither did the ground. He stared at the images longer than necessary. His composure fractured. Not dramatically, just enough. He said he panicked. He said it went too far. He said he didn't mean to kill her. Words spilled now, clumsy and inadequate, trying to reshape a past that refused to be softened. He said he lived nearby for decades because leaving would have meant admitting something. He said staying felt safer. He said watching the neighborhood forget was easier than facing what he had done. There was no apology. Charges were filed. Headlines followed. Chicago 1993 cold case solved. Suspect lived nearby for decades. The words carried weight, but they couldn't carry her back. In court, the family listened as timelines were recited like scripture. Dates, times, distances. The defense fought hard, as expected. Attacked memory. Attacked evidence. Attacked the absence of certainty that only time can steal. But the story held. It always had. It just needed the right moment to surface. When the verdict came, it landed without ceremony. Guilty. Outside, cameras flashed. Reporters spoke of closure. Resolution. Justice delayed but delivered. Inside, her mother held a photo taken years before the night everything stopped. She traced the edge with her thumb, feeling the texture of a life interrupted. The neighborhood grew quiet again. But this time, it wasn't ignorance. It was reflection. A cold case solved doesn't end when the gavel falls. It lingers in the spaces between houses, in the way people watch each other more closely, in the understanding that monsters don't always arrive from elsewhere. Sometimes they live nearby. Sometimes they blend in. Sometimes they wait. And sometimes, no matter how long it takes, the truth finds its way back to the surface, dragging everything with it. The river kept flowing. Chicago kept breathing. But the echo of 1993 never fully faded. The days after the verdict moved strangely, as if the city itself wasn't sure how to carry the weight it had just been handed. Morning traffic still clogged the expressways. Coffee shops still opened at dawn. Sirens still threaded through the streets. But beneath the noise, something had shifted. The case was solved. The word printed in bold, repeated until it lost its sharpness, yet no one could quite agree on what solved was supposed to feel like. For her family, it felt hollow. Relief came first, sharp and unexpected, followed immediately by a deeper ache that no conviction could touch. Knowing what happened didn't undo it. Knowing who did it didn't return the years. Answers filled one silence only to expose another. Why her? Why that night? Why no one saw enough, soon enough, to stop it? They walked past his house on the way to court, the same house that had stood quietly for decades, absorbing the seasons without comment. Reporters gathered there now. Cameras pointed at windows that revealed nothing. Neighbors avoided eye contact, suddenly aware that their normal had been built beside something unspeakable. Some swore they always felt uneasy. Others admitted they never suspected a thing. Both statements felt equally disturbing. Inside the department, the case became a study. Briefings referenced it as an example of patience, of persistence, of what modern forensics could resurrect from the past. Detectives spoke about missed opportunities, about small details once dismissed that now screamed for attention. Younger officers listened closely. Veterans stared at the floor. Everyone thought about the cases still sitting in cabinets, waiting. The suspect, now a convicted killer, was transferred quietly. No spectacle, no final words worth remembering. He left behind a house stripped of meaning, a life reduced to exhibits and transcripts. In interviews, he would later say nothing more. The story had hardened into a shape even he couldn't bend anymore. But closure, the thing everyone talked about, refused to arrive on schedule. Because even solved cases cast shadows. Questions surfaced in late-night conversations and comment sections. Had he acted alone? Was there someone else who knew? Could she have been saved if one call had been made? If one scream had been taken seriously? The what-ifs multiplied, immune to evidence. The riverbank was sealed off after the recovery, then reopened like nothing had happened. Joggers passed the spot without knowing. Fishermen cast lines into water that kept its secrets well. Only a small marker, placed quietly by the family, hinted at what had been pulled from that soil. No plaque, no explanation, just a name and a date that meant everything to some and nothing to most. The neighborhood changed in subtle ways. Porch lights stayed on longer. Strangers were noticed. Children were warned more carefully. Trust, once cracked, doesn't shatter loudly. It erodes. Her old apartment was occupied again. New tenants painted over the walls, unaware of the footsteps that once paced those rooms. Life layered itself over the past, thin but determined. The alley echoed with laughter again, though some residents said the sound never felt the same. On anniversaries, her case resurfaced in the media, not as breaking news, but as reflection, a reminder of how long the truth can hide in plain sight, of how proximity doesn't guarantee protection, of how time can both bury and reveal. Detectives involved carried it with them. One admitted years later that the case changed how he walked through his own neighborhood, how he looked at people who lingered, how he treated quiet complaints that once might have seemed insignificant. He said the hardest part wasn't the crime. It was realizing how close the answer had always been. Her mother stopped leaving the porch light on eventually, not because she stopped hoping, but because hope had finally changed shape. She visited the river sometimes, standing where the trees thinned and the water moved steadily on. She spoke aloud, not to the past, but to the space left behind. Some days it helped. Some days it didn't. Chicago absorbed the story the way it absorbs all stories, slowly, unevenly, with scars visible only if you know where to look. New cases took the headlines. New tragedies demanded attention. But this one lingered, cited whenever someone asked why cold cases matter, why reopening old wounds can sometimes be the only way to let them heal correctly. Because the truth, once uncovered, doesn't politely step aside. It stays. It rearranges memory. It forces reckoning. The case file was finally closed, stamped, and archived, its journey complete on paper. But the echo of 1993 remained active, moving quietly through the city's collective memory. A reminder etched not in ink, but in awareness. Solved didn't mean finished. It meant remembered. And in that remembering, the city learned something it could never unlearn. That danger doesn't always announce itself. That familiarity can be a disguise. And that sometimes justice arrives so late it feels less like a victory and more like a responsibility. To notice. To question. To never assume that silence means safety. The river flowed on, indifferent and eternal. Chicago did too. But beneath both, the past stayed awake, waiting to be heard whenever someone was willing to listen. Time did what it always does after a verdict. It thinned the crowd, dulled the headlines, softened the edges of outrage until only those closest to the wound still felt the sting. But the case refused to stay quiet. It resurfaced in classrooms and conference rooms, in late shifts and long drives home, in the spaces where people replayed moments they wished they had handled differently. A solved cold case has gravity. It bends conversations toward it. It pulls other stories into its orbit. The evidence was cataloged and sealed, but questions leaked through the seams. Analysts revisited the timeline again, not because it needed correction, but because it demanded understanding. The night wasn't just a line of hours anymore. It was a corridor of missed chances. The convenience store, the gas pump, the receipt. Each detail carried a weight it hadn't been allowed to carry before. Someone noticed something small in the transcript, buried between technical terms and procedural language. A pause. 7 seconds of silence recorded on tape during the second interview. 7 seconds where the suspect said nothing while staring at a point on the wall. 7 seconds where his breathing slowed, then steadied, as if he had arrived at a decision long rehearsed. The analysts circled it in red, not because it proved anything, but because it revealed something human. Control. The practiced discipline of someone who had lived with a secret so long it had become routine. The prosecution moved on. The defense filed appeals. Paper traveled between offices in thick envelopes that smelled faintly of ink and dust. But outside the legal machinery, the city kept interrogating itself. Call-in shows lit up. Online forums filled with speculation. Some insisted there had to be an accomplice. Others argued that the man had simply been lucky, until he wasn't. Luck. The word tasted wrong. A retired patrol officer called the department one evening, his voice thin with age. He remembered the night from 1993. Remembered a call that came in too late to matter. A suspicious person near the alley. He said he drove through, saw nothing, cleared it. He apologized without being asked. No one blamed him out loud. The blame lived elsewhere now, diffused across years and systems and assumptions. Detectives listened, nodded, took notes they didn't need. The call changed nothing legally. It changed everything emotionally. The family met with investigators one last time, not for updates, but for answers that didn't fit neatly into reports. They wanted to know what she might have felt, how long it lasted, whether she knew who he was. These were questions no file could satisfy. The detective chose his words carefully, aware that language can wound even when it's accurate. He spoke of moments, not minutes. Of fear, not suffering. Of certainty where he could offer it, and humility where he couldn't. Afterward, he sat alone in his car, hands on the steering wheel, engine off, listening to the city breathe around him. Solving a case doesn't make you lighter. It makes you heavier in a different way. The neighborhood association held a meeting. Folding chairs. Weak coffee. A sense of obligation rather than unity. People spoke about safety, about lighting, about reporting suspicious behavior. Someone asked how something like this could happen right under their noses. No one answered. The silence said enough. A journalist requested access to the case file for a long-form piece. The angle was familiar. Proximity, blindness, the myth of knowing our neighbors. The detective skimmed the draft later and felt a familiar discomfort. The words were true, but truth flattened into narrative can still miss the point. This wasn't about evil hiding cleverly. It was about ordinary routines failing to register threat until it was irreversible. At the river, the marker weathered quietly. Rain softened its edges. Leaves gathered at its base. People left flowers sometimes, strangers, mostly, drawn by the story rather than the person. The family visited less often now, not because they cared less, but because grief had learned to live without ceremony. The suspect adjusted to prison life with the same discipline he had applied to everything else. No outbursts, no interviews, no confession beyond what the record required. He kept his head down. Guards noted his predictability. Predictable people are easier to manage. Predictable people are harder to understand. A criminology class at a local university studied the case. Students debated prevention, profiling, data gaps. One asked whether the case would have been solved sooner today. The professor paused before answering. Technology helps, he said. Attention helps more. The room went quiet. Winter came early that year. Snow softened the city's angles, made everything look forgiving. Underneath, the ground held its memory. It always does. Somewhere, other cold cases waited, patient and unassuming, trusting time to either erase them or return them to the light. The detective transferred units not long after. New cases, new names. But sometimes, late at night, he still drove the route she used to walk. Not out of duty, out of habit. He imagined the sound of her footsteps, the weight of her keys in her pocket, the moment when a familiar street turned unfamiliar forever. These thoughts didn't haunt him. They anchored him. The city moved forward, as cities must. Construction crews tore up streets. New buildings rose where old ones had sagged. The skyline shifted. But some stories resist redevelopment. They settle into the foundation. Chicago learned, again, that cold cases aren't frozen because they lack truth. They freeze because truth needs conditions to surface, tools, timing, courage, and sometimes a willingness to look back at what was once dismissed as nothing. Solve didn't erase the night. It illuminated it. And illumination, unlike closure, is something you have to live with. Because once you see how close the danger was, how long it stood within arm's reach, you can't unsee it. You carry that awareness into every quiet street, every ordinary house, every neighbor whose name you never quite learned. The river flowed. The city listened. And somewhere between memory and vigilance, the echo of 1993 stayed alive, not as a warning shouted, but as a whisper that refused to fade. The appeal was filed quietly, the way these things always are, buried beneath procedural language and legal citations that drained the emotion from everything they touched. On paper, it was clean, technical, necessary. In reality, it felt like the past reaching up again, refusing to stay buried. The family received the notice in the mail, a thin envelope that carried disproportionate weight. They had known it was coming. That didn't make opening it any easier. The argument was predictable. Chain of custody, degradation of evidence, the reliability of memory after decades of exposure to media coverage. Time, once again, was put on trial. The defense didn't have to prove innocence. They only had to introduce doubt. Reasonable doubt, stretched thin enough to slip through the cracks. In a small appellate courtroom, the case was reduced to abstractions. Lawyers spoke calmly about soil samples and fiber transfer, about evolving forensic standards and the danger of hindsight. No one said her name more than necessary. No one mentioned the alley, the river, the quiet terror of a night that never ended for her. This was about process now, not pain. The judges listened, impassive. They always do. Outside, life went on with brutal efficiency. A new missing person case made the evening news. Different face, different family, same familiar language. Mysterious disappearance. Community on edge. Police asking for information. The echo was impossible to ignore. Some viewers turned off the television. Others leaned closer. The detective who had reopened the case watched from home, arms folded, jaw tight. He knew the appeal was part of the system. He also knew what it cost the people forced to relive it. Justice, he thought, was not a straight line. It was a loop, constantly circling back on itself, demanding endurance more than belief. In the neighborhood, people spoke less about the trial and more about themselves, about what they had missed, about the way fear had blended into routine so smoothly it became invisible. One man admitted he used to see her walking past his porch almost every night. He had never learned her name. He said it out loud for the first time at a block meeting, his voice catching on the admission. The room stayed silent, heavy with recognition. Memory shifted again, this time inward. The case was no longer just something that had happened. It was something that had been lived alongside, unnoticed. A journalist uncovered an old letter sent to the police department in 1994. Anonymous, rambling, discarded as unreliable at the time. It mentioned a man who watched too much and knew things he shouldn't. The address was wrong by 2 houses. Close enough to matter. Too far to act on back then. The letter made the rounds online, fueling anger, regret, and a familiar, useless question. What if? The prosecutor responded publicly, measured and firm. The conviction stood on evidence, not coincidence. The appeal would be reviewed. The facts had not changed. The words were meant to reassure. They didn't. At the river, spring returned. The water rose and fell, indifferent to human schedules. Someone had tied a ribbon to a nearby branch, faded from months of sun and rain. It fluttered gently, a small, persistent marker in a place that had learned to absorb sorrow without complaint. In prison, the man marked time the same way he always had, quietly. No disciplinary issues. No letters to the press. He attended programs, ate his meals, slept. Those who watched him said he never spoke about the case, as if silence could still protect him from something. It couldn't. The appellate decision came months later. Dense, careful, unemotional. The conviction was upheld. The court acknowledged the passage of time, the challenges it posed, and the extraordinary convergence of evidence that overcame it. The language was restrained, but the message was clear. The truth had endured. The family received the news without celebration. Relief arrived again, softer this time, less sharp, settling into a place already shaped by grief. They had learned not to expect finality. They accepted stability instead. For the city, the case receded once more, sliding back into reference rather than headline. It became shorthand, a cautionary example, something cited when budgets were discussed, when cold case units were defended, when someone asked whether old files were worth reopening. The answer came easily now. Yes, because this one had proven something uncomfortable, that the past is not inert, that proximity is not safety, that evil does not require spectacle to function. Sometimes it only requires patience. The detective visited the river one last time before moving on to another city, another job. He stood where the trees thinned, listened to the water, and thought about how close the answer had always been. Not hidden, not buried deep, just overlooked, protected by routine and assumption. He didn't stay long. Lingering can turn reflection into paralysis. As he walked away, the ribbon on the branch twisted in the wind, its color nearly gone. It didn't need to be bright anymore. The story had been told. The lesson absorbed, at least for now. Chicago carried on, wiser in a way that didn't feel like wisdom, more like scars arranged into patterns. Somewhere, another quiet street waited. Another ordinary house. Another set of assumptions. And beneath it all, the awareness remained, steady, unresolved, necessary, that the line between safety and danger is thinner than anyone wants to believe, and that sometimes the only thing colder than a cold case is the silence that allows it to stay that way for so long. After the appeal was denied, the case entered a quieter phase, the kind that doesn't make headlines but seeps into institutional memory. It became a reference point spoken in hallways, a file pulled during trainings, a name mentioned when someone asked why patience mattered more than speed. The noise faded, but the imprint deepened. Cold cases have a strange afterlife. They don't end, they disperse. Pieces of them lodge in policy changes, in altered instincts, in the way officers hesitate before dismissing a minor complaint. This one did exactly that. Funding for the cold case unit was renewed the following year, justified not by optimism, but by precedent. Proof that time, when challenged correctly, could still yield answers. In the neighborhood, the house sat empty for months. The city posted notices. Grass grew uneven in the yard. Windows collected dust. People walked past it faster than necessary, as if speed alone could neutralize memory. Children were warned not to play near it, though no one could quite explain why without reopening the story. Eventually, it was sold. New owners painted it a lighter color, changed the door, planted flowers that struggled at first, then took hold. Life asserting itself, cautiously. The family chose not to attend the sentencing hearing in person. They watched it later, on a small screen, the volume low. The judge spoke of accountability, of harm, of years stolen. The words were correct. They were also insufficient. No sentence could mirror the scale of absence. No number of years could equal the ones she never got to live. Afterward, they gathered quietly. No speeches. No declarations of closure. Just shared space. Grief had taught them efficiency. They knew when silence was enough. The detective, now in a different city, received an email from a young officer he had once mentored. It was short. Just a thank you. Just an acknowledgement that reopening old files didn't feel pointless anymore. He read it twice, then archived it. Some victories are meant to be private. The media revisited the story one last time on an anniversary. The framing had changed. Less shock, more reflection. The phrase, lived nearby for decades, still carried power, but now it served as warning rather than hook. Commentators spoke about vigilance fatigue, about how familiarity dulls alarm. They spoke about listening differently. A woman called into a late-night radio show after hearing the segment. She said she had once ignored a feeling like that. A man watching too closely. A discomfort she couldn't justify. She said she called it in recently, years later, because the story reminded her that instincts don't require evidence to be valid. The host thanked her. The line went dead. Somewhere, something small shifted. At the river, the marker remained. Someone had replaced the ribbon with a stone, smooth and deliberate, engraved with nothing. No name, no date, just presence. It felt appropriate. The place no longer needed explanation. It had become a quiet witness. In prison, the man aged. Hair thinning. Steps slower. The The routines remained intact, but time reclaimed its interest. He was no longer anonymous there. Other inmates knew why he was inside. Some asked questions. Most didn't. Reputation in prison doesn't rely on headlines. It relies on whispers. He never asked for forgiveness. He never offered clarification. Silence followed him the way it always had, a shield that now served no purpose. The truth had outgrown it. The city absorbed another season. Snow turned to rain. Construction crews rerouted streets. New storefronts opened. Old ones closed. Somewhere, a cold case detective pulled a file at random, inspired by nothing more than a feeling that this one deserved another look. That was how it always started. The lesson of 1993 lingered in the background, not as fear, but as attentiveness, as permission to question what feels normal, as a reminder that danger doesn't always announce itself with urgency. Sometimes it waits to be ignored. Her name surfaced occasionally, spoken by people who never knew her, who knew only the outline of her story. It didn't bother the family anymore. Memory, once released, doesn't belong to anyone exclusively. It becomes part of a larger vigilance. The case stopped being about her alone. It became about the cost of looking away. Chicago moved forward, carrying that cost quietly, folding it into its endless catalog of lessons learned too late, but not entirely in vain. Somewhere between the river and the street where she last walked, the city held the truth steady, no longer hidden, no longer frozen. And in that space, between what was lost and what was learned, the cold case finally did what it had waited decades to do. It changed how people listened. Years passed in the way they always do after a story loses its urgency. Slowly at first, then all at once. The case drifted from public consciousness into something quieter, something internal. It no longer needed headlines to exist. It had embedded itself into habit, into the way people hesitated before dismissing a stranger, into the way officers reread reports instead of skimming them. The cold case had become a reference point without asking to be remembered. The family learned how to live around the absence rather than against it. Birthdays were acknowledged differently now. No candles left unused. No extra place set at the table. They spoke her name without flinching, without the sharp intake of breath that once followed. Grief didn't leave. It reorganized. It made room for ordinary days again. Her mother stopped watching true crime segments altogether. Not out of avoidance, but saturation. She had lived inside one for too long. Instead, she took walks in the morning, tracing familiar routes through unfamiliar quiet. Sometimes she passed the street where her daughter had last been seen. Sometimes she didn't. Choice mattered now. At the police academy, instructors referenced the case during lectures on pattern recognition and community awareness. They didn't dramatize it. They didn't need to. The facts were unsettling enough. A suspect nearby, for decades, overlooked not because he was clever, but because he was ordinary. The recruits shifted in their seats when they heard that part. Ordinary was harder to guard against. One cadet asked whether the suspect had shown warning signs. The instructor paused, then answered honestly. Yes and no. He had been noticed, but not prioritized. He had been unsettling, but not actionable. He existed in the gray area where discomfort doesn't yet translate into response. That was where the system failed. That was where it learned. In prison, the man developed health problems common to age and confinement. Nothing dramatic. Nothing symbolic. Just the slow erosion of control that time demands from everyone eventually. Medical charts replaced legal briefs as the dominant paperwork of his life. Guard said he still spoke little. When he did, it was about routine. Meals. Schedules. Weather. He never mentioned her. Silence, once again, was his chosen shape. The house he had lived in sold again. The second owners moved out after a few years, citing unrelated reasons. A third family moved in, unaware at first, then informed by a neighbor who hesitated before speaking. They debated whether to stay. In the end, they did. The house wasn't guilty, they reasoned. It was just a structure. But some nights, they admitted, the air felt heavier than expected. The river flooded one spring, water rising high enough to erase the marker temporarily. When it receded, the stone reappeared, shifted but intact. Someone moved it back into place. No one saw who did it. No one needed to. A journalist contacted the family about an anniversary piece. They declined politely. The story had done its work. It didn't need repetition. The journalist wrote it anyway, focusing instead on institutional change, on cold cases reopened because of renewed faith rather than fresh tragedy. Her name appeared once, near the end. It felt appropriate. The detective received another message years later, this one from a different city. A cold case solved. DNA match. Suspect arrested. The officer wrote that the Chicago case had been cited during the pitch for resources. Evidence that persistence mattered. Evidence that proximity was not a defense. The detective stared at the message longer than necessary, then closed his laptop. Some connections don't require acknowledgement. Chicago continued to transform. Neighborhoods shifted. Boundaries blurred. New generations walked streets unaware of what had once happened there. That was not failure. That was life doing what it does best, continuing. The danger lay not in forgetting details, but in forgetting lessons. Late one night, a patrol officer responded to a call about a man lingering near an apartment building. No crime reported, just a feeling. The officer took it seriously, ran the name, asked questions. The man left. Nothing came of it. Or maybe something did. These outcomes don't announce themselves. The cold case lived on in moments like that. Invisible. Influential. Her family gathered one final time at the river, not on an anniversary, not for ceremony, but because it felt right. They stood together, watched the water move past, unchanged and unstoppable. They spoke about ordinary things. Weather, work, plans. She would have liked that, they decided. Normal conversation. Normal time. As they left, her mother looked back once, then didn't again. Not because she was done, but because she no longer needed to watch the place hold her grief. It could do that without her. The city slept that night the way cities always do, unevenly. Lights on in some windows, darkness in others. Somewhere, another file waited. Somewhere, another silence asked to be noticed. The legacy of the cold case was not fear. It was attention. Attention to what lingers, to what feels slightly wrong, to what hides not in shadows, but in plain sight, close enough to touch. And as long as that attention remained alive, the echo of 1993 would never truly fade. Time smoothed the sharpest edges, but it never erased the outline. The case had become part of the city's undercurrent, not something spoken about often, but something felt. It surfaced in training manuals and policy reviews, in late-night conversations between officers who had learned the cost of ignoring instinct. It existed now as awareness, a quiet recalibration of how danger was defined. The cold case unit kept her file on a shelf marked closed, but no one treated it that way. Closed didn't mean finished. It meant resolved enough to learn from. New detectives read it and noticed the same thing every time. The suspect wasn't brilliant. He wasn't invisible. He was familiar. That familiarity had been his camouflage. A seminar on investigative bias used the case as an example. Normalcy bias. The tendency to underestimate threats that fit into our expectations of ordinary life. The instructor didn't need to dramatize it. The facts carried their own weight. A man living nearby. Decades passing. Silence mistaken for harmlessness. The room stayed quiet longer than usual. In the neighborhood, memory thinned but never disappeared. Someone repainted the mural near the alley, covering old graffiti with color and shape. No reference to the case. Just movement and light. It wasn't denial. It was reclamation. Space can hold more than one truth. The house, now lived in by people with no connection to the past, hosted a birthday party one summer afternoon. Laughter spilled onto the sidewalk. Balloons bobbed in the heat. Neighbors passed, some pausing, some not. The sound felt almost defiant. Life refusing to be defined by what once happened there. In prison, the man received fewer letters as the years went on. Interest faded. The public moved on. His health declined steadily, unremarkable in its progression. The body doesn't care about notoriety. It only cares about time. When he walked the yard, he did so alone. Familiar, once again, in the most isolated way possible. The family marked milestones quietly now, not with ritual, but with acknowledgement. A nod, a shared glance. They had learned that remembrance didn't require repetition. It required presence. A cold case conference invited the detective to speak. He declined at first, then reconsidered. On stage, under flat lighting, he told the story without embellishment. He didn't speak about heroism or triumph. He spoke about waiting, about reading files slowly, about listening to things that didn't sound urgent. The audience listened the way people do when they recognize themselves in a mistake. Afterward, a woman approached him. She worked in records. not a detective. She said the talk made her think differently about her job, about the importance of details that pass through unnoticed hands. He thanked her. It was one of the few compliments that mattered. The river continued its work. Flood. Recede. Flood again. The stone marker weathered, edges softened, surface polished by time and touch. It asked for nothing. It remembered for everyone. A student wrote a thesis on delayed justice, citing the case not as an anomaly, but as an inevitability in complex systems. The conclusion was cautious. Progress requires discomfort. Reopening old wounds is sometimes the only way to prevent new ones. The paper received high marks. The lesson traveled on. One evening, a patrol officer sat in his car, engine idling, watching a quiet street. Nothing wrong. Nothing urgent. Just a man standing too long near a building entrance. The officer watched, thought of the case, thought of proximity. He stepped out of the car and approached. The man moved on. No report filed. No incident logged. Just attention applied at the right moment. The city never noticed. It didn't need to. The cold case had done its work in silence, changing outcomes without fanfare. That was its legacy. Not fear. Not spectacle. Awareness embedded so deeply it no longer needed a name. Her story existed now in fragments, scattered across minds that would never meet. A caution without a headline. A lesson without a lecture. A reminder that safety is not a given, but a practice. As another year ended, snow settled over Chicago, muting the city's noise. Streets glowed under lamps. Windows held their own small worlds. Somewhere between those lights and the dark spaces between them, the echo of 1993 rested, not dormant, not loud, but steady, waiting, not to be solved again, but to be remembered whenever someone chose to look twice, listen longer, and refuse to let the familiar pass unquestioned. Time smoothed the sharpest edges, but it never erased the outline. The case had become part of the city's undercurrent, not something spoken about often, but something felt. It surfaced in training manuals and policy reviews, in late-night conversations between officers who had learned the cost of ignoring instinct. It existed now as awareness, a quiet recalibration of how danger was defined. The cold case unit kept her file on a shelf marked closed, but no one treated it that way. Closed didn't mean finished. It meant resolved enough to learn from. New detectives read it and noticed the same thing every time. The suspect wasn't brilliant. He wasn't invisible. He was familiar. That familiarity had been his camouflage. A seminar on investigative bias used the case as an example. Normalcy bias. The tendency to underestimate threats that fit into our expectations of ordinary life. The instructor didn't need to dramatize it. The facts carried their own weight. A man living nearby. Decades passing. Silence mistaken for harmlessness. The room stayed quiet longer than usual. In the neighborhood, memory thinned but never disappeared. Someone repainted the mural near the alley, covering old graffiti with color and shape. No reference to the case. Just movement and light. It wasn't denial. It was reclamation. Space can hold more than one truth. The house, now lived in by people with no connection to the past, hosted a birthday party one summer afternoon. Laughter spilled onto the sidewalk. Balloons bobbed in the heat. Neighbors passed, some pausing, some not. The sound felt almost defiant. Life refusing to be defined by what once happened there. In prison, the man received fewer letters as the years went on. Interest faded. The public moved on. His health declined steadily, unremarkable in its progression. The body doesn't care about notoriety. It only cares about time. When he walked the yard, he did so alone. Familiar, once again, in the most isolated way possible. The family marked milestones quietly now, not with ritual, but with acknowledgement. A nod, a shared glance. They had learned that remembrance didn't require repetition. It required presence. A cold case conference invited the detective to speak. He declined at first, then reconsidered. On stage, under flat lighting, he told the story without embellishment. He didn't speak about heroism or triumph. He spoke about waiting, about reading files slowly, about listening to things that didn't sound urgent. The audience listened the way people do when they recognize themselves in a mistake. Afterward, a woman approached him. She worked in records, not a detective. She said the talk made her think differently about her job, about the importance of details that pass through unnoticed hands. He thanked her. It was one of the few compliments that mattered. The river continued its work. Flood. Recede. Flood again. The stone marker weathered, edges softened, surface polished by time and touch. It asked for nothing. It remembered for everyone. A student wrote a thesis on delayed justice, citing the case not as an anomaly, but as an inevitability in complex systems. The conclusion was cautious. Progress requires discomfort. Reopening old wounds is sometimes the only way to prevent new ones. The paper received high marks. The lesson traveled on. One evening, a patrol officer sat in his car, engine idling, watching a quiet street. Nothing wrong. Nothing urgent. Just a man standing too long near a building entrance. The officer watched. Thought of the case. Thought of proximity. He stepped out of the car and approached. The man moved on. No report filed. No incident logged. Just attention applied at the right moment. The city never noticed. It didn't need to. The cold case had done its work in silence, changing outcomes without fanfare. That was its legacy. Not fear. Not spectacle. Awareness embedded so deeply it no longer needed a name. Her story existed now in fragments, scattered across minds that would never meet. A caution without a headline. A lesson without a lecture. A reminder that safety is not a given, but a practice. As another year ended, snow settled over Chicago, muting the city's noise. Streets glowed under lamps. Windows held their own small worlds. Somewhere between those lights and the dark spaces between them, the echo of 1993 rested. Not dormant, not loud, but steady. Waiting. Not to be solved again, but to be remembered whenever someone chose to look twice, listen longer, and refuse to let the familiar pass unquestioned. The city never marked an ending. There was no final date circled on a calendar, no official moment when Chicago decided the story was complete. It simply faded from conversation, slipping into the deeper layers of collective memory where certain names and years remain understood without being spoken. That was how this case finally settled. Not erased, not celebrated, but absorbed. The file sat where it belonged now, no longer waiting. Its edges worn from years of handling. Its pages carrying the weight of everything they had held back and eventually released. Cold case was no longer stamped across it in red. But the word lingered anyway, not as a status, but as a reminder of how close truth can remain without being seen. For the family, life continued in smaller, steadier motions. Grief stopped demanding attention every moment of every day. It became quieter, more patient, appearing in unexpected places, in a song on the radio, in a stranger's laugh that sounded almost familiar, in the way certain streets were still avoided without conscious thought. They didn't speak about closure anymore. They spoke about endurance. Her mother aged gently after that. Slower steps. Softer voice. She kept a single photograph on a shelf, not prominently displayed, not hidden, just present. When asked about her daughter, she no longer led with tragedy. She spoke about who she was before the night everything changed. What she liked, how she laughed, what she never got the chance to become. That, she decided, mattered more. In prison, the man's world narrowed further. His name faded even there, replaced by routine and decline. One winter, his health failed enough to move him to the infirmary. No reporters came. No statements were made. There was no reckoning scene, no final confession, no moment of clarity that could rebalance the past. Time did what it always does. It reduced everything to the same quiet ending. The city noticed nothing. Chicago had already learned what it needed from him. The neighborhood continued to live on top of the memory without fully erasing it. New residents arrived. Old ones left. Children grew up playing in the alley, never knowing why some adults watched a little more closely, why certain instincts had been passed down without explanation. Safety became a practice rather than an assumption. Somewhere in the city, a cold case detective opened a file late one night, alone in a quiet office, fluorescent lights humming overhead. The case wasn't famous. No headlines attached. Just a name, a date, a few unanswered questions. The detective paused, thought of 1993, thought of proximity, thought of time. Then he kept reading. That was the real ending. Not justice. Not punishment. Not even resolution. Attention. Attention that survived the headlines. Attention that outlived outrage. Attention that turned absence into awareness. The river continued to move, indifferent and eternal, carrying reflections of the city's lights across its surface. Somewhere beneath that water, the past rested, no longer hidden, no longer searching to be found. It had already done its work. Chicago breathed in the cold air of another night. Trains rattled. Doors locked. Porch lights flickered on. Somewhere, someone hesitated before dismissing a feeling they couldn't explain. And because of that hesitation, something else, somewhere else, didn't happen. The cold case had begun in silence. It ended the same way. Not forgotten. Just understood. Long after the story stopped being told, its influence kept moving through the city in quiet, practical ways. No one pointed to it anymore. No one needed to. It lived in protocols adjusted without ceremony, in instincts sharpened without announcement. In the subtle way hesitation had been reframed as responsibility rather than doubt. A new generation of officers took to the streets, carrying lessons they never knew the source of. They asked one extra question. They walked one extra block. They stayed with a call a few minutes longer than the report required. Nothing dramatic. Nothing heroic. Just attention, applied early, applied often. The kind of attention that never makes the news because it prevents the story from forming in the first place. In the neighborhood, the alley was repaved. The dented hoop was replaced with a clean metal rim bolted properly into brick. Kids played there in the evenings, shoes scraping against concrete that no longer remembered the weight of old fear. Parents watched from stoops, not anxious, just aware. Awareness had become a background hum, steady and low. The river kept its rhythm. It always had. It always would. The stone remained where it had been placed again, its surface smooth from hands that passed over it without ceremony. No flowers anymore. No ribbons. Just presence. A marker not of tragedy, but of permanence. A reminder that some truths don't need explanation to endure. Her name surfaced less frequently now, but when it did, it wasn't attached to the night or the crime. It was attached to a change, to a reason, to a sentence that began with because. Because of her case, this unit exists. Because of that delay, this policy changed. Because of 1993, someone noticed something sooner. That was how meaning settled. The family understood this better than anyone. They didn't need the city to remember her the way they did. They needed it to carry forward what her absence had taught. They measured time not by anniversaries anymore, but by ordinary days that arrived without dread. Ordinary days had become their quiet victory. Somewhere in the system, a clerk digitized another old box of files, fingers moving quickly, efficiently, unaware that a small notation would stand out later to someone else, somewhere else. That was how it worked now. The machinery kept turning, improved by lessons learned the hard way. Chicago never claimed perfection. It never does. It simply adapted, the way cities survive, by absorbing damage, by rearranging priorities, by learning just enough to keep going. On a winter night, not unlike the one that started it all, snow fell softly across the streets. Light reflected off wet pavement. Footsteps echoed briefly and then disappeared. A woman walked home alone, keys threaded between her fingers out of habit more than fear. She felt watched for a moment, paused, looked back. Nothing there. Still, she crossed the street, chose the brighter side, arrived home safely. No one noticed. No report was filed. No story was written. And that was the point. The cold case had done its final work not in a courtroom or a headline, but in that small, almost invisible decision. A pause. A choice. A life continuing uninterrupted. Chicago slept unevenly, as it always had, but with its eyes just a little more open. The past remained where it belonged, not buried, not loud, but integrated into the present, shaping it without demanding credit. The echo of 1993 didn't fade. It transformed. From a scream into a signal. From a loss into a warning. From silence into attention that refused to look away. Years passed in the way they always do, quietly, unevenly, without asking permission. The city kept changing its face, block by block, storefront by storefront, while the bones of the old streets stayed exactly where they were. History didn't disappear. It learned how to blend in. The case no longer lived in active memory, but it hadn't slipped into obscurity either. It existed in footnotes, in training rooms, in late-night conversations between detectives who understood that time was not an enemy so much as a test. They spoke about it without drama. Chicago 1993, the one where proximity mattered, the one that taught them patience could be as dangerous as haste, if left unchecked. Every so often, someone new stumbled across the story. A journalist researching unresolved crimes. A student writing a thesis on delayed justice. A podcaster chasing atmosphere more than answers. They all felt the same chill when they realized how close the truth had been, how ordinary the setting, how easily the outcome could have been different. None of them ever fully captured it. They couldn't. The real weight had never been in the facts alone. It had been in the waiting. In a small apartment across town, an old man listened to the radio most days, volume low, window cracked open even in winter. He had grown up not far from where it happened. He remembered the posters, the fear, the way parents had called their kids home early for months afterward. He never knew the victim personally, but her absence had shaped his youth anyway. When the arrest finally came decades later, he turned the radio off and sat in silence. Not relieved, not angry, just still. Some things didn't ask for reaction. They asked for acknowledgement. That was enough. The systems built after the case continued doing their work quietly. Cold case units received more funding, not because of headlines, but because results had accumulated slowly, convincingly. DNA advanced. Databases connected. Old instincts learned how to work with new tools instead of against them. The past became searchable in ways it never had been before. Yet the lesson remained unchanged. Look closer. The family marked time differently now. Birthdays passed without the sharp intake of breath they used to bring. Holidays returned to something resembling warmth. There were still moments, always would be, but they no longer defined the whole. Grief had loosened its grip, not because it had been satisfied, but because it had been heard. Sometimes, late at night, her sister dreamed of streets that no longer existed, of streetlights that flickered differently than they do now. In the dream, nothing happened. That was what lingered. The normalcy. The alternate version of history where a door opened, where footsteps continued, where a life moved forward uninterrupted. She woke from those dreams without tears, just a sense of distance, like watching a train pass that she no longer needed to catch. The man responsible faded further into obscurity, becoming less a person than a cautionary outline. His story was stripped of mystery, reduced to its most uncomfortable truth. Evil didn't always arrive loudly. Sometimes it lived next door. Sometimes it waited patiently. Sometimes it survived because no one wanted to believe it could be that close. Chicago never forgot that part. Not entirely. On certain nights, when the city quieted just enough, you could feel it in the way windows reflected streetlight instead of darkness, in the way footsteps unconsciously quickened, in the way people trusted their instincts even when logic told them not to worry. These were not signs of fear. They were signs of learning. The cold case had stopped being a case long ago. It had become a reference point, a marker in time that separated what the city was from what it chose to become. No plaque announced it. No monument explained it. Its presence was woven into decisions made every day by people who never knew her name, never read the file, never saw the photographs. They just lived differently because of it. That was the quiet aftermath. Not justice ringing loud and clear, but awareness, steady and unglamorous, refusing to fade. Chicago moved forward carrying that awareness like a second heartbeat. Unseen, uncelebrated, but essential. The past stayed where it belonged. And the city kept watching. The city learned to live with the echo, not by silencing it, but by letting it become part of the background noise. Sirens, traffic, distant trains, the low murmur of late-night radios. Chicago had always been a place where sound never truly disappeared. The case joined that constant hum, no longer sharp, no longer demanding, but impossible to remove. In police archives, the file remained accessible, tagged and cross-referenced, a completed investigation that still refused to feel complete. Detectives knew that feeling well. Solved did not mean healed. It meant contained. It meant named. It meant that chaos had been forced into a shape the mind could tolerate, even if the heart never fully accepted it. Some nights, younger officers asked about it. Not in briefings. Not officially. Quiet questions over bad coffee near the end of a shift. How did they miss it for so long? How did he stay so close? How did nobody see? The veterans never gave dramatic answers. They said the same thing every time. People see what they expect to see, and they avoid what would change everything. That answer always landed heavier than any theory. The neighborhood continued its slow transformation. Old brick buildings gave way to glass. Corner stores turned into cafes. Rents rose. Faces changed. But certain residents remained, anchored by memory more than ownership. They watched the changes without resentment, without nostalgia. They had already lived through something that taught them what real loss looked like. Everything else felt negotiable. A woman who once lived 2 doors down from him still remembered the way he waved. Friendly, unremarkable, the kind of man you trusted with spare keys. When the truth emerged, she replayed every interaction in her head, searching for signals that had never registered as warnings. She eventually stopped. There was no profit in self-punishment. She chose instead to trust her instincts more fiercely, even when they contradicted appearances. That was her inheritance from the case. Across the city, universities referenced it in criminology lectures, not as a spectacle, but as a study in delay, proximity, human error, the gap between evidence and action. Students listened, took notes, underlined phrases like lived nearby for decades, overlooked patterns, absence of urgency. For some of them, it was just material. For others, it was a pivot point, the moment they understood what their future work might actually require. Patience, yes, but also courage. The family no longer followed coverage. They didn't need updates, retrospectives, anniversary pieces. The story had moved past them in a way that felt both fair and strange. They had reclaimed their privacy not by demanding it, but by outlasting the attention. When her name appeared now, it did so gently, without intrusion. That felt right. There were still unanswered questions. There always would be. Motives that never fully aligned. Moments that remained blurry. Decisions made by people who no longer remembered why they made them. The city accepted that ambiguity. It had learned that certainty was not a prerequisite for vigilance. On certain nights, detectives still drove the old routes out of habit, windows down, radio low. Not searching, remembering. The streets looked smaller than they used to. Or maybe they always had been. Maybe time had just stretched them in memory. Streetlights cast the same cones of light. Shadows behaved the same way. It was unsettling how little had actually changed. That realization lingered. Evil didn't need new terrain. It only needed indifference. The case had stripped that illusion away. Somewhere, a cold case unit reopened another file, sparked by a detail that once seemed insignificant. A neighbor. A distance measured in steps rather than miles. The influence was indirect but undeniable. Lessons transferred quietly, without ceremony, without attribution. That was how progress really happened. Chicago carried on, restless and resilient. It never apologized for what it had been. It didn't need to. It proved itself instead, one small correction at a time. One instinct trusted. One silence questioned. The story no longer asked to be told. It asked to be remembered correctly. Not as a headline. Not as a shock. But as a warning written into the muscle memory of a city that learned, too late but not uselessly, what happens when the truth lives next door and no one wants to knock. The night closed in again, as it always did, and Chicago adjusted its pace accordingly. Doors locked. Lights dimmed. Lives continued. And somewhere in that vast, breathing sprawl, the echo remained. Not loud enough to frighten, not quiet enough to ignore. Just present. Just waiting to be heard by whoever needed it next. Time did not soften the city. It refined it. Chicago learned where to place its weight, where to pause, where to lean in closer instead of looking away. The case, once a wound, had become scar tissue, proof of damage, proof of survival, proof that the body remembers even when the pain is no longer sharp. By then, the phrase cold case carried a different resonance. It was no longer shorthand for failure. It was a warning label. A reminder that time does not erase responsibility, it only rearranges it. Detectives spoke the words with respect now, aware of what patience could uncover and what complacency could cost. In some office downtown, long after midnight, a lone investigator stared at a wall of photographs from an entirely different case. Different faces, different year, same unease. The feeling that something obvious was being politely ignored. He thought about 1993. About distance measured in footsteps. About how close the truth could stand without casting a shadow if no one bothered to look down. He adjusted the board, moved one photo closer to another. The room felt quieter after that, like something had aligned. Outside, the city breathed. The river reflected lights that no longer belonged to the same decade. Glass towers replaced brick silhouettes. But beneath the surface, the same current flowed, carrying old stories forward whether they were acknowledged or not. Chicago had never been able to choose which history stayed with it. It could only choose what to do with them. The family rarely spoke about the case now, but they felt its presence in the way strangers sometimes hesitated before asking questions, in the careful tone reporters used when they did reach out. The spectacle had faded. What remained was respect. That, more than anything else, felt earned. Her niece grew up knowing her name not as a victim, but as a person whose absence had changed things. She learned early that safety wasn't guaranteed, that trust required attention, that instincts mattered. Not in a fearful way, in a practical one. These lessons settled into her life quietly, shaping choices she never questioned. That was the inheritance. The man who caused it all became a footnote in the end. His name appeared in records, in databases, in legal summaries stripped of emotion. He did not dominate the narrative. He didn't get to. The story had moved past him, reframing itself around impact rather than perpetrator, consequence rather than curiosity. Chicago approved of that shift. On late nights, the streets still told their stories to anyone willing to listen. Footsteps echoed. Doors slammed. Laughter spilled from open windows. Life insisted on itself with familiar urgency. Yet beneath it all ran a sharpened awareness, subtle but constant, like a hand resting lightly on a pulse. Nothing dramatic announced this change. No sirens. No headlines. Just a city that had learned to look twice. Somewhere, a call came in that might once have been dismissed. A neighbor reporting something that felt off. Nothing concrete. Nothing provable. Just a feeling. This time, it was enough to trigger a visit. Enough to justify attention. Enough to interrupt a trajectory before it hardened into tragedy. No one connected it back to 1993. They didn't need to. The cold case had finished teaching its lesson long ago. It no longer needed credit. Its value lived in prevention, in the absence of another name added to a list that never should have existed in the first place. Chicago settled into the night once more, imperfect and alert. The past remained close, not haunting, not accusing, just present, like a shadow that reminded the city where the light came from. The story did not end. It stabilized. And in that stability, the city found something rare. Not peace, but vigilance that refused to sleep. The night kept arriving on schedule, indifferent to what the city had learned, unconcerned with the scars it carried beneath its lights. Chicago did not ask for mercy from the dark. It prepared for it. That was the difference now. That was what remained after everything else had settled. Somewhere near the lake, wind moved across empty sidewalks, pushing scraps of paper into corners where old posters once hung. Faces had faded from walls long ago, but the habit of looking had not. Eyes lifted instinctively. Steps adjusted. Doors were checked twice without conscious thought. The city had trained itself, slowly, quietly, without ever calling it training. In police buildings, the late shift spoke less and listened more. Radios crackled with half-finished sentences, with pauses that mattered as much as the words themselves. When silence stretched too long, it no longer felt empty. It felt suspicious. That awareness had been paid for in years, in mistakes, in lives interrupted. No one forgot that. The case existed now only as a reference point, but it had changed the language of investigation. Nearby meant something different. Familiar meant something different. Normal had lost its protective camouflage. Detectives knew that danger did not always announce itself. Sometimes it blended. Sometimes it waited for permission granted by disbelief. That permission was harder to come by now. In the neighborhood where it all began, a new mural covered the side of a building once left bare. It wasn't about the case. It wasn't a memorial. It was color, movement, faces layered into each other, alive and unfinished. People passed it every day without thinking about why it was there, only that it made the street feel watched in a good way. Seen. Claimed. Memory doesn't always need names. The family felt distance growing, not from her, but from the version of themselves frozen in those first years after the disappearance. They could see those people now, exhausted and raw, clinging to questions that had no intention of answering quickly. They respected that version of themselves. They were grateful to have moved beyond it. Sometimes they still wondered what she would think of the city now, of how it had changed, of how it carried her absence forward without collapsing under it. That question had no answer, and for once, they were comfortable with that. The man who lived nearby for decades became less than a cautionary tale. He became an example stripped of drama, reduced to a single uncomfortable truth passed quietly between professionals. Monsters don't need distance. They need cover. And cover is often provided by routine, by politeness, by the human desire to keep the world predictable. Chicago no longer fed that desire so easily. On a slow night, a patrol car idled at a corner it had passed 1,000 times before. An officer looked up at an apartment window, noticed a light that never turned off, a pattern that didn't quite align. No crime, no evidence, just something that felt wrong. The officer made a note, a small one, the kind that used to get lost. This time, it didn't. That was how the legacy continued, not loudly, not ceremoniously, but through interruption. Through moments where instinct was allowed to override inconvenience. Through choices that leaned toward caution instead of comfort. The city did not congratulate itself for this. Cities don't. They either adapt or they don't survive. Chicago adapted. The cold case no longer haunted the streets. It sharpened them. It lingered in reflections on glass, in the way strangers crossed paths without colliding, in the shared understanding that safety was a process, not a promise. Night deepened. Lights stayed on. Somewhere, a door closed a little earlier than usual. Somewhere else, someone stayed awake a little longer, listening. Nothing happened. And that, in the end, was the loudest outcome of all.